October 14th, 1793. 4:30 a.m. The Conciergerie Prison, Paris. In the damp, fetid cell that once housed common criminals, the former Queen of France sits on a straw mattress, her once golden hair now gray and cropped short, her hands trembling as she writes what she believes will be her final letter. Marie Antoinette, born Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna of Austria, descendant of the most powerful royal dynasty in European history, has been reduced to a prisoner awaiting execution. Yet the woman who will face the guillotine in a few hours carries within her bloodline the genetic legacy of emperors who ruled from Vienna to Madrid, from Prague to Milan, a dynasty whose influence shaped European politics for over 6 centuries. The royal blood flowing through Marie Antoinette's veins connects her to some of the most illustrious and controversial figures in European history, from Charlemagne to Charles V, from Rudolf II to Philip II of Spain. Her ancestry represents not merely aristocratic privilege, but the complex web of marriages, alliances, and dynastic calculations that determined the fate of nations and millions of people across centuries of European warfare and diplomacy. The Habsburg dynasty that produced Marie Antoinette can trace its origins to Radbot of Klettgau, born around 985 in the region that is now southwestern Germany. Radbot built the castle of Habsburg, or Hawk's Castle, in modern-day Switzerland around 1020, giving the family its name and establishing the fortress that would serve as the symbolic seat of what would become Europe's most enduring royal dynasty. The name Habsburg derives from this castle, though the family would eventually abandon their Swiss origins to rule from Vienna, Prague, and Madrid. Radbot's son, Bohemia I, born around 1025, expanded the family's holdings through strategic marriages and military campaigns, establishing the pattern of territorial expansion that would characterize Habsburg policy for the next millennium. Werner I married into the powerful noble families of Swabia and Alsace, creating alliances that protected Habsburg lands while providing opportunities for further expansion. His descendants continued this policy of strategic marriage, gradually accumulating titles, territories, and influence throughout the Holy Roman Empire. The Habsburg rise to imperial prominence began with Rudolf I, born on May 1, 1218, who became Holy Roman Emperor in 1273, after a period of political instability known as the Great Interregnum. Rudolf I's election as emperor marked the beginning of Habsburg dominance in Central Europe, though it would take several more generations before the family established hereditary control over the imperial title that would make them the most powerful dynasty in Christendom. Rudolf I's most significant achievement was the conquest of Austria from Ottokar II of Bohemia in 1278. At the Battle of Marchfeld, this victory gave the Habsburgs control over the duchies of Austria and Styria, establishing Vienna as their primary seat of power and beginning their transformation from minor Swiss nobles into major European rulers. Rudolf I invested his sons, Albert and Rudolf I, with these Austrian territories on December 27, 1282, creating the foundation of Habsburg power that would endure until 1918. Albert I of Habsburg, born around 1255, succeeded his father as Duke of Austria, and later became Holy Roman Emperor from 1298 until his assassination in 1308. Albert's reign was marked by constant warfare against rebellious nobles and rival claimants to the imperial throne, but he successfully consolidated Habsburg control over Austria, while expanding their influence into neighboring territory. His marriage to Elizabeth of Gorizia Tyrol in 1274 brought additional lands into the Habsburg domain, and established the pattern of using matrimonial alliances to expand dynastic power. The Habsburg policy of strategic marriages reached its most sophisticated form under Frederick III, born on September 21, 1415, who ruled as Holy Roman Emperor from 1452 to 1493. Frederick VI is credited with establishing the motto EU, which has been interpreted various ways, but most commonly as Austria est impera orbi universo. Austria is destined to rule the world. Frederick's long reign consolidated Habsburg control over the imperial title and expanded their territories through diplomatic rather than military means. Frederick III, most important achievement was arranging the marriage of his son Maximilian to Mary of Burgundy in 1477, a union that brought the wealthy Burgundian territories, including the Netherlands and parts of modern-day France, under Habsburg control. This marriage demonstrated the Habsburg ability to use dynastic politics to acquire territories that might have taken decades of warfare to conquer, establishing the principle that would guide their expansion for the next several centuries. Maximilian I, born on March 22, 1459, transformed the Habsburg dynasty from a regional Central European power into a global empire through his marriage policies and diplomatic innovations. Known as the Last Knight for his personal participation in tournaments and military campaigns, Maximilian combined medieval chivalric ideals with Renaissance political sophistication to expand Habsburg influence across Europe and into the New World. Maximilian's marriage to Mary of Burgundy made him one of the wealthiest rulers in Europe, but his second marriage to Bianca Maria Sforza in 1494 provided him with Italian connections that would later prove crucial for Habsburg expansion into the Italian peninsula. More importantly, Maximilian arranged the marriages of his grandchildren that would create the vast empire ruled by Charles V in the early 16th century. The marriage of Maximilian's son, Philip the Handsome, to Joanna of Castile in 1496, united the Habsburg territories with the Spanish kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, creating a dynastic union that would dominate European politics for the next 2 centuries. Philip, born on July 22, 1478, was considered one of the most attractive princes of his generation, but his early death in 1506 left his young son Charles to inherit the combined Habsburg-Spanish inheritance. Charles V, born on February 24, 1500 in Ghent, inherited an empire that stretched from Austria to Spain, from the Netherlands to Naples, and included vast territories in the Americas that Spanish conquistadors were conquering and colonizing. His election as Holy Roman Emperor in 1519 created a concentration of power that alarmed other European rulers and led to decades of warfare against France, the Ottoman Empire, and Protestant German princes. Charles V's reign from 1519 to 1556 represented the pinnacle of Habsburg power, but it also demonstrated the impossibility of governing such a vast and diverse empire from a single center. Charles spent his entire reign traveling between his various territories, fighting wars on multiple fronts, while trying to maintain Catholic unity against the Protestant Reformation and Islamic expansion into Europe. His decision to abdicate in 1556 and divide his empire between his son Philip II, who received Spain and its American colonies, and his brother Ferdinand I, who received the Austrian lands and the imperial title, created the division between the Spanish and Austrian branches of the Habsburg dynasty. The Austrian branch of the Habsburg family, which would eventually produce Marie Antoinette, continued to rule the Holy Roman Empire from Vienna, while gradually expanding its control over Bohemia, Hungary, and other Central European territories. Ferdinand I, born on March 10, 1503, established the Austrian Habsburgs as the primary defenders of Catholic Europe against Ottoman expansion, beginning a series of wars that would continue for more than 2 centuries. Ferdinand's son, Maximilian II, born on July 31, 1527, ruled as Holy Roman Emperor from 1564 to 1576, and demonstrated the religious tolerance that would become characteristic of the Austrian Habsburgs. Unlike his Spanish cousins, who pursued policies of religious uniformity and persecution, Maximilian II allowed Protestant worship in his territories and attempted to find common ground between Catholic and Protestant theologians. This pragmatic approach to religious differences reflected the multi-ethnic and multi-confessional nature of the Austrian Habsburg domain. The reign of Rudolf II, born on July 18, 1552, marked a fascinating period in Habsburg history that combined imperial power with Renaissance learning and artistic patronage. Rudolf established his court in Prague, where he assembled one of the greatest collections of art and scientific instruments in Europe, while supporting astronomers like Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler. However, Rudolf's preoccupation with alchemy, astrology, the occult, led to political instability that eventually forced him to abdicate in favor of his brother Matthias. The 30 Years' War, 1618–1648, devastated Central Europe and nearly destroyed the Austrian Habsburg monarchy. Ferdinand II, born on July 9, 1578, attempted to impose Catholic uniformity on his territories, triggering rebellions that expanded into a continent-wide conflict involving most European powers. The war's conclusion with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 reduced Habsburg power and established the principle of religious tolerance that would shape European politics for the next century. Leopold I, born on June 9, 1640, ruled as Holy Roman Emperor from 1658 to 1705, and restored Habsburg prestige through successful wars against Louis XIV of France and the Ottoman Empire. Leopold's reign saw the Great Turkish War, 1683–1699, which finally ended Ottoman expansion into Europe and established Austrian control over Hungary and Transylvania. These victories made the Austrian Habsburgs the dominant power in Central and Southeastern Europe, while creating the multi-ethnic empire that would characterize Austria until 1918. The War of the Spanish Succession, 1701–1714, arose when Charles V of Spain died without heirs, creating a crisis over who would inherit the Spanish throne. Leopold I's son Charles V, born on October 1, 1685, claimed the Spanish inheritance, but was ultimately forced to accept a compromise that gave Spain to the French Bourbon dynasty while compensating Austria with the Spanish Netherlands, modern Belgium, and territories in Italy. Charles V's reign from 1711 to 1740 was dominated by his efforts to ensure that his daughter Maria Theresa would inherit the Austrian territories despite the Salic law that excluded women from succession. The Pragmatic Sanction of 1713 declared Maria Theresa the heir to all Habsburg territories, but Charles VI spent the rest of his reign seeking recognition of this arrangement from other European powers. Maria Theresa, born on May 13, 1717, became Archduchess of Austria, Queen of Hungary and Bohemia, and ruler of the Habsburg territories when her father died in 1740. Her accession triggered the War of the Austrian Succession, 1740–1748, as other powers challenged her right to rule and attempted to partition the Habsburg domains. Maria Theresa's successful defense of her inheritance established her as one of the most capable rulers in Habsburg history and one of the most powerful women in 18th-century Europe. Maria Theresa's marriage to Francis Stephen of Lorraine in 1736 created the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, combining the Austrian Habsburg territories with the Duchy of Lorraine, and strengthening the dynasty's position in European politics. Francis Stephen, born on December 8, 1708, brought French cultural influences to the Austrian court, while supporting Maria Theresa's administrative and military reforms. The marriage between Maria Theresa and Francis Stephen produced 16 children, including Marie Antoinette, born on November 2, 1755, at the Hofburg Palace in Vienna. Marie Antoinette was the 15th child and 11th daughter of this remarkably fertile union, born into a world where her mother ruled one of Europe's great powers, while managing constant diplomatic and military challenges. Maria Theresa's court in Vienna represented the height of 18th-century European culture, combining Habsburg traditions with Enlightenment ideas and French sophistication. The Empress implemented extensive reforms in education, law, and administration, while maintaining Austria's position as a great power through the complex diplomatic system known as the reversal of alliances that aligned Austria with France against Prussia and Britain. Marie Antoinette's childhood at the imperial court exposed her to the highest levels of European culture and politics, but it also instilled in her a sense of entitlement and distance from ordinary people that would later contribute to her unpopularity in France. The Austrian court's emphasis on ceremony, hierarchy, and magnificence shaped Marie Antoinette's understanding of royal behavior and prepared her for life at Versailles. though it failed to equip her with the political skills necessary to navigate the crisis that would engulf the French monarchy. The education provided to Habsburg archduchesses in the 18th century emphasized accomplishments suitable for diplomatic marriages rather than serious preparation for governing. Marie Antoinette learned to speak French, Italian, and Latin while developing skills in music, dancing, and drawing that would make her an attractive bride for European princes. However, her education neglected history, politics, and economics, leaving her unprepared for the complex challenges she would face as Queen of France. Maria Theresa's foreign policy in the 1760s focused on strengthening the alliance with France that had been established during the 7 Years' War, 1756–1763. This diplomatic revolution aligned Austria with its traditional enemy, France, against the rising power of Prussia, creating new opportunities for dynastic marriages that could cement the alliance between the two Catholic powers. The marriage negotiations between Austria and France that would determine Marie Antoinette's fate began in 1765, when the French Dauphin Louis Auguste, later Louis XVI, was identified as a suitable husband for one of Maria Theresa's daughters. The Empress initially considered her daughter Maria Carolina for this match, but political circumstances led to Marie Antoinette being selected instead, fundamentally altering the course of her life. The diplomatic correspondence between Vienna and Versailles during the marriage negotiations reveals the calculated nature of 18th-century dynastic politics, where personal happiness was subordinated to state interests and young people were treated as pawns in larger geopolitical games. Marie Antoinette's marriage was designed to strengthen the Franco-Austrian alliance and provide both courts with the domestic legitimacy that came from successful foreign policy. The preparation of Marie Antoinette for her French marriage involved extensive training in French etiquette, history, and culture, though this education remained superficial and focused on appearances rather than substance. French tutors were brought to Vienna to teach her proper pronunciation and court manners, while her teeth were straightened and her posture corrected to meet French standards of beauty and deportment. The marriage contract between Marie Antoinette and the Dauphin Louis Auguste was signed on April 19, 1770, creating a legal and diplomatic bond between Austria and France that both courts hoped would prevent future conflicts between their territories. The dowry arrangements and territorial adjustments associated with the marriage demonstrated the continuing importance of dynastic alliances in 18th-century European politics. Marie Antoinette's journey from Vienna to France in May 1770 was orchestrated as a magnificent display of Habsburg wealth and power, designed to impress the French court and people with Austria's continuing importance in European affairs. The procession across Europe included hundreds of carriages, thousands of servants, and elaborate ceremonies at every major city, creating a spectacle that announced the arrival of a new French Dauphin. The ceremony of remise on May 7, 1770, at an island in the Rhine River near Strasbourg, symbolically transferred Marie Antoinette from Austrian to French sovereignty. This ritual required her to abandon all her Austrian clothing and possessions before being dressed in French garments, representing her transformation from an Austrian archduchess into a French princess. The ceremony reflected the 18th-century belief that royal marriages required the complete assimilation of foreign brides into their new countries. Marie Antoinette's wedding to the Dauphin Louis Auguste on May 16, 1770, at the Palace of Versailles was one of the most magnificent ceremonies of the 18th century, designed to demonstrate the wealth and power of the French monarchy while celebrating the alliance between France and Austria. The ceremony was attended by the highest nobility of both countries and was followed by weeks of festivities that cost enormous sums and contributed to the financial crisis that would eventually destroy the monarchy. The early years of Marie Antoinette's marriage were marked by personal difficulties that reflected both the arranged nature of the union and the inexperience of both spouses in matters of intimacy and governance. The Dauphin Louis Auguste was a shy, awkward young man who struggled with the ceremonial demands of court life, while Marie Antoinette found herself isolated in a foreign court where she was viewed with suspicion, because of her Austrian origins. The failure of Marie Antoinette and Louis Auguste to consummate their marriage for several years became a source of diplomatic tension between France and Austria, as both courts worried that the lack of heirs would undermine the alliance. This personal problem was complicated by the public nature of royal life at Versailles, where every aspect of the royal couple's relationship was scrutinized by courtiers and reported to foreign ambassadors. Marie Antoinette's gradual transformation from a naive Austrian archduchess into a leader of French fashion and culture demonstrated her adaptability, but also contributed to her reputation for frivolity and extravagance. She became associated with new styles of dress, entertainment, and decoration that reflected changing tastes, but also represented enormous expenditures at a time when the French government was struggling with mounting debts. The death of Louis XV on May 10, 1774, elevated Marie Antoinette to the position of Queen of France at the age of 18, making her one of the most powerful women in Europe, but also exposing her to the full weight of public scrutiny and political responsibility. Her Austrian birth and her association with the unpopular alliance with Austria made her a natural target for critics of royal policy and government extravagance. Marie Antoinette's reign as queen coincided with a period of increasing financial crisis and social tension in France that would ultimately lead to the Revolution of 1789. Her spending on fashion, gambling, and court entertainments became symbols of royal excess at a time when ordinary French people were struggling with economic hardship and social inequality. The Queen's involvement in the construction and decoration of the Petit Trianon at Versailles represented both her artistic taste and her desire for privacy, but it also became a symbol of royal isolation from the problems of ordinary people. The creation of an artificial pastoral environment where the Queen could play at being a simple country woman struck many observers as emblematic of the monarchy's disconnection from reality. Marie Antoinette's political influence over her husband Louis XI was both exaggerated by her enemies and underestimated by modern historians. While she did intervene in some policy decisions, particularly those affecting Austria, her primary focus remained on court life and personal relationships rather than systematic political engagement. However, her Austrian birth made her a convenient scapegoat for unpopular policies and military defeats. The birth of Marie Antoinette's first child, Marie Theresa Charlotte, on December 19, 1778, provided some relief from the criticism surrounding her failure to produce an heir, but it also intensified public scrutiny of her maternal behavior and child-rearing practices. The Queen's decision to breastfeed her children personally was seen as either admirably natural or dangerously innovative, depending on the observer's political perspective. The diamond necklace affair of 1784-1785 devastated Marie Antoinette's reputation and demonstrated her political naivety in dealing with court intrigue and public scandal. Although she was innocent of any wrongdoing in the affair, her association with the scandal reinforced public perceptions of her as frivolous and untrustworthy, contributing to the anti-monarchical sentiment that would fuel the revolution. The financial crisis that gripped France in the 1780s was exacerbated by the costs of the American Revolutionary War and the structural problems of the old regime's tax system. But Marie Antoinette became a convenient symbol of royal extravagance and fiscal irresponsibility. Pamphlets and songs attacking l'Autrichien, the Austrians, spread throughout France, creating a climate of hostility that would make rational political solutions increasingly difficult. The calling of the Estates General in May 1789 marked the beginning of the French Revolution and the end of the absolute monarchy that had shaped European politics for centuries. Marie Antoinette's response to the revolutionary crisis demonstrated both her courage and her inability to understand the depth of popular discontent with the monarchy and the old regime. The march of Parisian women to Versailles on October 5, 1789, forced the royal family to return to Paris and effectively ended the independence of the monarchy from popular pressure. Marie Antoinette's behavior during this crisis, particularly her apparent willingness to resist popular demands, reinforced her reputation as an enemy of the people and a supporter of counter-revolution. The royal family's attempted flight to Varennes in June 1791 represented Marie Antoinette's most significant political intervention and her greatest political mistake. The Queen's correspondence with her brother Leopold II of Austria and her support for armed intervention against the revolution provided her enemies with evidence of treason that would later be used to justify her execution. The trial of Marie Antoinette before the Revolutionary Tribunal in October 1793 was a foregone conclusion, designed more to provide propaganda for the Republic than to determine her guilt or innocence. The charges against her included conspiracy with foreign enemies, corruption of her husband, and conducting secret intelligence with hostile powers, all of which reflected her correspondence with Austria and her opposition to revolutionary policies. The execution of Marie Antoinette on October 16, 1793, marked the end of more than 1,000 years of monarchy in France and symbolized the revolutionary determination to destroy all vestiges of the old regime. Her dignified behavior on the scaffold, including her apology to her executioner for accidentally stepping on his foot, demonstrated the personal courage that had characterized her response to the revolution, despite her political failures. The legacy of Marie Antoinette extends far beyond her role in the French Revolution to encompass the broader themes of dynastic politics, cultural transformation, and the collision between traditional monarchy and modern democracy. Her life represented the end of an era in which royal marriages could determine the fate of nations and dynasties, could rule by divine right, without regard to popular opinion. The Habsburg bloodline that produced Marie Antoinette continued to rule Austria-Hungary until 1918, when the empire collapsed in the aftermath of World War I. The genetic legacy of centuries of strategic marriages and dynastic alliances was finally overwhelmed by the forces of nationalism and democracy that the French Revolution had unleashed across Europe. Marie Antoinette's story remains compelling because it illustrates both the privileges and the burdens of hereditary power in the 18th century. Born into one of Europe's most powerful dynasties, educated for a life of ceremonial magnificence, and married to secure a diplomatic alliance, she found herself trapped by circumstances beyond her control when revolutionary forces challenged the fundamental assumptions of monarchical government. The transformation of Marie Antoinette from an Austrian archduchess into a symbol of royal excess and ultimately a victim of revolutionary justice reflects the broader transformation of European society in the late 18th century. Her fate demonstrated that birth, beauty, and royal blood could no longer protect individuals from the consequences of political change when popular movements demanded accountability from their ruler. The enduring fascination with Marie Antoinette in popular culture reflects both sympathy for her personal tragedy and recognition of her historical significance as a figure who embodied the collision between traditional monarchy and modern democracy. Her famous, though probably apocryphal response, "Let them eat cake," to reports of bread shortages, has become a symbol of aristocratic indifference to popular suffering, regardless of whether she actually said it. The contrast between Marie Antoinette's privileged childhood in Vienna and her final days in the conciergerie prison illustrates the dramatic reversals of fortune that characterized the revolutionary period, and the impossibility of predicting how rapidly political circumstances could change. The Habsburg princess, who had been taught to expect deference and luxury, found herself subjected to the same treatment as common criminals in the final months of her life. Her correspondence from prison, particularly her letters to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, reveals a woman who had finally grasped the seriousness of her situation, but maintained her dignity and religious faith despite facing imminent death. These documents provide insight into her private thoughts and feelings that were rarely visible during her public life as Queen of France. The genealogical legacy of Marie Antoinette extends through her surviving daughter, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte, who married her cousin, the Duke of Angoulême, and lived until 1851, witnessing the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy and its final collapse in 1830. Through these descendants, the Habsburg bloodline remained connected to French royalty and European aristocracy throughout the 19th century. The historical reputation of Marie Antoinette has undergone significant revision since the 19th century, as historians have gained access to Austrian and French archives that reveal the complexity of her position and the constraints under which she operated. Modern scholarship has generally been more sympathetic to her personal situation, while acknowledging her political failures and cultural insensitivity. The Palace of Versailles today preserves many of the spaces associated with Marie Antoinette's life as queen, including her private apartments and the Petit Trianon, allowing visitors to experience something of the world in which she lived and the lifestyle that provoked such intense popular resentment. These preserved spaces serve as monuments to a vanished world of aristocratic privilege and artistic achievement. The story of Marie Antoinette's bloodline, stretching from the medieval castles of Switzerland to the guillotine of revolutionary Paris, encompasses nearly 8 centuries of European history and illustrates the rise and fall of dynastic power in the face of changing political and social conditions. Her Habsburg ancestry connected her to the great political and military events that shaped European civilization, while her fate demonstrated the limits of hereditary authority when confronted by popular sovereignty and democratic ideals. The tragedy of Marie Antoinette lies not only in her personal fate, but in her symbolic role as the last representative of a form of government that had ruled Europe for more than a millennium. Her execution marked not just the end of her life, but the end of an era in which birth-determined political power and royal bloodlines shaped the destinies of nations and peoples across continents.